Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest podcast. Today, I'm joined by Stu Bell, who is a client manager from Dodd & Co Chartered Accountants, and Stu specialises in hospitality, construction, and family business. Hi there, Stu. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, Richard. We've had a busy couple of months tax planning ahead of the tax year end. What I would say, it's been great to finally get back out there and do it in person rather than over phone calls and Zoom. Getting back to a bit of normality and getting out there and seeing clients is great.
Yeah, I've heard that from a number of people actually recently. Just nice to get some face-to-face contact again. But Stu joining me today to briefly reflect on the spring statement, which was delivered by Chancellor Rishi Sunak yesterday, and has been met with some very mixed reviews, to say the least, particularly given this morning's media round, which I've seen already. And we've even seen normally government backing newspapers come out and pretty strongly condemn the statement that was given yesterday, even though there was probably more in there than you would normally expect from what is normally more of an update on finances rather than a true budget announcement. However, I do think you could class this as a kind of mini budget, given some of the announcements that were made. The biggest of which probably being the increase in national insurance threshold by £3,000. However, with everything that is going on at the moment, it still doesn't really seem to have hit the mark with the majority of the public or the business community across the UK, it seems. So just firstly, Stu, what was your initial reaction on a personal level? Was there anything in there that got you particularly excited?
Certainly nothing to get me overly excited. The rise of the NI threshold, as you mentioned, was probably the most pleasant surprise to come out of it. That'll give everyone earning in excess of 12,570, an additional £330 of disposable income, which was probably the most positive news that came out of it. On a personal level, finally having the NI and tax thresholds in line, it's going to make my life a lot easier in helping my clients understand their tax liabilities going forward.
Yeah, well, that's certainly good to hear. So, as a Chamber of Commerce, you know our main focus is on helping businesses to grow and develop. And so it might just be useful for me to give a little bit of context for listeners on what Cumbrian businesses have been telling us in the run-up to yesterday's statement as well. And what we have been hearing pretty much across the board is that businesses have been struggling with various issues created by, the pandemic, Brexit, and now more recently, the war in Ukraine, of course. And Cumbria has a number of sectors that rely on fairly large staffing numbers, such as hospitality, engineering, manufacturing. And we've been hearing from many of these businesses that they simply can't get the people at the moment. And this has been for a number of reasons, such as availability of the right skills and lack of seasonal and foreign workers, for example, in the case of hospitality and agricultural sectors. And obviously that largely was kind of focused around the issues of leaving the European Union. We also have a number of businesses in the area that use significant amounts of fuel and energy. And so the soaring cost of these resources has really turned the screw in a lot of businesses we've been engaging with when discussing new policy ideas and so on. We've even found that some staff are struggling to afford fuel to get to work. And of course, not everyone can work from home like a lot of us can. And many of the larger sectors in Cumbria, hospitality, etc., like I mentioned, if things are to get even worse, it could be the case that some people are having to seek new employment. All of this on the back of potentially depressed finances related to the pandemic anyway. The truth is, all of these factors are really pressing businesses in Cumbria at the moment. And so we were hoping to see some kind of impactful announcements from the Chancellor yesterday. But as I alluded to in my opening remarks, a number of these measures that the Chamber and others were hoping to see were not actually included. And, there was really only kind of breadcrumbs for businesses when you start to break things down. So a two-part question for you, Stu. From an accounting perspective, what have businesses and families been telling you over the last few months? And have people been struggling to balance the books?
So yeah, just picking up on your first point in regards to staffing, it does seem to be a huge issue for particularly Cumbrian hospitality businesses. Recruiting and retaining staff is just incredibly hard across the whole sector. So many factors play into this, including overseas EU staff, immigration restrictions, flexible working and life balance. Many businesses are finding innovative ways to recruit staff and placing higher importance on staff wellbeing and staff welfare is absolutely crucial. Other businesses are unfortunately finding themselves at the mercy of staff shortages, having to close or reduce hours to offset this, which is extremely frustrating when the demand has actually been there. In terms of rising living costs, it's a worrying time not only for business owners but for everyone in general. The only certainty is in fact uncertainty at the minute. Business owners now more than ever need to be innovative, proactive as well as reactive in the way that they operate. Although we're going through tough times, essentially we are where we are. We're a resilient nation and we'll work our way through this like we always do.
Moving on to the statement itself, and in the build-up, to all this, the other chambers of commerce had been feeding in kind of information on the ground to the British chambers of commerce, in advance of all of this. And the British chambers of commerce actually called on the government to do a number of things, 5 things in total, which were delay the impending national insurance rise by a year, apply a temporary energy cap for small businesses, provide additional financial support through the expansion of the energy bills rebate scheme, which was for households, so it also included small firms and energy intensive businesses as well. A moratorium for the life of this parliament on all policy measures that would increase any business costs. And finally, to deliver practical solutions, ultimately to ease these, in particular, supply chain disruption and labour shortages that we've already touched on. Sadly, it does seem that the Chancellor hasn't really taken advantage of any of these opportunities. And, as mentioned earlier, there's very little of any real substance for business at the moment. What was your interpretation and thoughts on what you heard yesterday?
So yeah, there wasn't a great deal of positive news for employers. Mr Sunak announced that employment allowance will be rising to £5,000, which is a £1,000 increase in the current allowance. However, it's likely to be offset by the rise in living wage for the majority of businesses, meaning additional wage costs for employers softened by this employment allowance rise. He also announced about the fuel duty dropping 5p a litre, which is obviously going to assist the vast majority of businesses as well as individuals. But given fuel prices have risen 25-30p a litre over the last month, employers are going to need to factor in additional fuel costs to the budget for the year ahead, as well as the imminent rise in power costs as well. One thing I suppose to remember would be for companies to remember the super deduction relief that's still in play, which was announced in the last budget, essentially allowing companies to purchase qualifying plant and machinery equipment and gain 130% relief on that, which is an effective tax rate of 25%. There were some amendments to the R&D, research and development rules, which essentially expanded qualifying expenditure to include data and cloud costs, and now also pure mathematics. R&D, a very complex area, but should any business have any queries on this, we have specialists in-house at Dodd that can be able to help with that. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the government do push ahead with the corporation tax rate increase, which is due from April 23. That'll be interesting in the autumn budget. From a personal point of view, I would have loved to see more assistance put in place for employers. However, realistically, following the sport over the past 2 years, in kind of unprecedented circumstances, it wasn't really a surprise to see very little change on that front.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, we thought that was going to be the case ultimately too. And, as usual, I think a lot of what was announced yesterday was kind of ultimately smoke and mirrors, as these statements can tend to be, Stu. Already this morning, just following on from your point about fuel, I have heard in kind of several interviews on the radio that road users have been turning up at petrol stations and so on to fill up, and prices have actually gone up rather than gone down, and all of that, despite coming into place at 6 p.m. last night. So things again are often kind of very different on the ground than they are, and it does seem that not all fuel providers in particular seem to be passing on these savings as quickly as they could be. But in terms of smaller businesses, do you think there was any particular kind of good news for that area of business?
Obviously, the NI threshold increase was a win for the self-employed. As mentioned previously, generally mean an NI saving of around about £330 per annum for everyone. There was also the announcement that income tax rates will drop to 19% from 2024, which Mr. Sunak dressed up quite nicely. However, essentially, it's going to be offset by the imminent 1.25% rise in NI from April 22. So yeah, essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. What I would say is that we are still seeing new businesses thriving in uncertain times. A lot of the businesses, a lot of the kind of new entrepreneurs who took a leap of faith during the pandemic, we are now seeing reaping the rewards, and long may that continue. I would also say to anyone out there thinking about starting up a new business, just to make sure that you have a business plan in place and that you're getting the right advice from the outset. There can be a lot of tax allowances at stake as well as other things, grants and everything like that. We absolutely love working with new startup businesses and guiding people along their journeys, essentially helping them achieve their personal goals.
And again, on your second point, from what we can see with the cost of living crisis happening right now, although the income tax rate is due to drop to 19%, even if it was not being offset by the 1.25 rise in NI contributions, it's likely to be too far in the future. I think that was 2024 that was mentioned. So to make any real difference to people right now, it's not really kind of what was needed. It was more immediate support that we were looking to see. And linked to your third point, the Chancellor did get a lot right in terms of reaction to the pandemic, but this hasn't stopped him. I'm going to, like I mentioned, a very tricky media round this morning in relation to his announcement yesterday. But it is good to hear that many of your clients' new businesses are thriving. And actually, I read somewhere that there was more new businesses opened during the pandemic than there had been for quite some time, which I suppose would kind of shock a lot of people. But it is good to see that entrepreneurs were still able to kind of grasp those opportunities that they saw during that time. Although, as I'm sure you've heard, we did also see that there were many kind of exploitative ventures and illegal goings on, which has now meant that the government has had to write off, I believe, a kind of 4.9 billion through fraudulent business claims during the pandemic. Which, obviously, if that wasn't the case, there may be more kind of funding to go around at times like this. But things move on, and it's one of those things that we can't kind of go back on, really. So moving on from that, what would you like to see included in the autumn tax plan that the Chancellor mentioned yesterday?
So yeah, I think what I'd like to see and what I actually envisage seeing are two very different things. In terms of what I feel is likely to happen, it seems there's going to be a big emphasis placed on business investment. It's very likely that they'll raise the annual investment allowance up to 500k indefinitely, which for 99% of businesses will mean 100% of tax allowances against any plant and machinery purchased. As mentioned previously, they may well look at delaying the rise in corporation tax rate up to 25%, or they may well look at some form of similar scheme to the current super deductions scheme that's currently in place. Yeah, be interested to see where they go with that. And then in terms of what I'd like to see, dealing with a lot of hospitality clients who have obviously reaped the rewards from the reduced VAT rates, I'd love them to have a look at this across the board. I've always thought that the set 85k turnover threshold needs revisiting. A lot of smaller businesses actually work up to the VAT threshold and just don't go over it because it's not worth their while. Perhaps some form of tapered VAT rate to encourage smaller businesses to continue trading, exceeding the VAT threshold without it really negatively affecting them would be really good to look at. However, that's what I'd like to see, and I would imagine that's fairly unlikely.
What were your thoughts on the Making Tax Digital scheme, which is due to kind of continue to be rolled out for all VAT registered businesses from the 1st of April this year?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, slightly condescending that HMRC want all businesses over onto computer software when the system that they've got in place isn't exactly great themselves. Perhaps they should maybe have looked a little bit closer to home first before introducing it to everyone else. I mean, it's came with its challenges moving all of our clients over onto MTD compliant software. However, what I would say is that it's changed our role as an accountant markedly. We've now got real-time information at the tip of our fingertips for the vast majority of our client base, which enables us to work more proactively than we've ever been able to in the past. And then from the business owner's perspective, being able to make decisions in real time is just absolutely essential. And the last 2 years has only enhanced that fact. So I'd encourage any business, whether they're VAT registered or not, to get moved over onto some accounting software to help them make business decisions going forward. Having our clients working from software also allows us to look at business finance functions as a whole and ensure businesses are working smarter and in the most efficient manner. There's nothing more satisfying than giving our clients time back to spend on other parts of the business, promoting their business on social media rather than doing their figures, or for instance, letting them spend more time with the families doing school pickups rather than crunching numbers. That can be automated.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're completely right on your first point about the systems in place with HMRC. I know it does seem, or can appear a little bit hypocritical, I suppose. But as you say, there is clear advantages to switching over and going digital, which can only be good news for these businesses moving forward. And, in actual fact, some of those kind of messages that you would be looking to kind of get over around that, it is something that we would put out there as a chamber anyway. So, hopefully a combination of that, plus obviously the kind of impending deadlines will help and make people, kind of understand those benefits in a bit more detail. So we'll leave it there, Stu. Thanks for joining us today to share a few thoughts on yesterday's announcements, and obviously hope to see you again when hopefully there'll be some bigger announcements to actually pick through and delve a little bit deeper into what's going on. But really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that concludes today's podcast. Thanks for listening in. And do take a look at Dodd & Co.'s website for further information about their services on www.doddaccountants.co.uk. And as always, you can sign up to other chamber communications on www.cumbriachamber.co.uk or check out our Growth Hub website on www.cumbriagrowthhub.co.uk, or you can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. Thanks again for listening in, and see you next time.